Hello and welcome back to the Fantasy Playmakers. What's up, guys? For today's video, I'm going to be doing another player versus player comparison, and today I'm going to be talking about two teammates. They're both wide receivers for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's going to be Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So I'm going to be going through each player's current ADP, their 2019 season, their 2020 season, what I'm expecting from them in 2021, and then which player I would take if I was choosing between them in drafts. And this isn't for me to tell you guys which player you should be picking. I will give my opinion, but it's more for me to provide all the information so you guys can make the most educated decisions in your drafts and pick who is better for your team. If you guys are watching this video and find yourself enjoying the content, please just leave a like and subscribe to the channel. That really helps support me. And then let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Are you guys going to be drafting Mike Evans or Chris Godwin in fantasy this year? Let's get right into it. So to start off with their current ADP, Mike Evans is being drafted as the wide receiver 14, and Chris Godwin is going as the wide receiver 18. And it may seem like, there's a decent amount of difference between their draft positions, but there's really not. They're both in this range where wide receivers are just being picked all over the place, so they're still being drafted very close together, basically within like 4 or 5 picks of each other using Underdog's ADP. Mike Evans has been a late 3rd or early 4th round pick, and Chris Godwin has been more of an early 4th round pick, so they're both going in that same range, and you could definitely be choosing between these two on draft day. Looking at each player's 2019 season, both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin absolutely balled out, put up huge NFL and fantasy football seasons. Mike Evans finished as the wide receiver 3 in points per game, and Chris Godwin finished as the wide receiver 2. They were playing on this high volume Tampa Bay passing offense. They were 3rd in the NFL in pass plays per game, and Jameis Winston led the NFL in passing yards. This was the season where he went for 5,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 30 interceptions. So just a pretty crazy stat line, but it was definitely benefiting Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. In 13 games, Mike Evans was targeted 118 times, brought in 67 receptions, and then totaled 1,157 receiving yards, and then 8 receiving touchdowns. He was a top-tier deep threat, per usual. He was number 4 in deep targets, number 2 in total target distance, and then number 4 in average target distance. So it was just feasting down the field. And I mean, that's what he's been doing his entire career. Chris Godwin played in 14 games, was targeted 120 times, brought in 86 receptions for 1,333 receiving yards and 9 receiving touchdowns. This was really Godwin's year to truly break out as one of the top NFL wide receivers, and he complemented Evans very well. Like I talked about, Evans was a guy who was beating people down the field. Chris Godwin was a yak monster. He led the NFL in yards after the catch, so they were both operating very cohesively in this offense. Going into 2020, there was definitely some pretty serious shakeup with this offense. Obviously, Jameis Winston's no longer the starting quarterback. They go out and bring in Tom Brady, and not only that, but there are also just some kind of added weapons. Antonio Brown joins after week 8. You also have Rob Gronkowski coming in, and then some other players developing behind them like Scotty Miller, Tyler Johnson. Those guys were getting a little bit more involved, so their overall fantasy production did fall off. Both finished as very solid wide receiver 2s. Mike Evans was the wide receiver 13 in points per game. Chris Godwin was the wide receiver 15. This Buccaneers offense was still a very high volume passing attack. They were number 10 in pass plays per game and number 3 in total passing yards, but they just weren't to that same level that they were in 2019, and it was really just because they were more efficient in 2020. Right, in 2019, Jameis Winston would go out there, throw a pick 6, and they'd be behind, so they'd have to be throwing the entire game. This year, the Bucs would get up, and Brady was able to, take care of the ball. So, they didn't have to be passing all 60 minutes of the game. Mike Evans was banged up basically the entire season, but he still managed to play 16 games, which was crazy. He played a bunch of those games while not being 100 or even like 90%. He was definitely battling through some things, but still put up some really respectable numbers. He was targeted 109 times, caught 70 passes for 1,006 receiving yards, and then 13 touchdowns. He was number 4 in total touchdowns, and I've actually seen him be criticized quite a bit for this. Obviously catching a lot of touchdowns is good, but they're saying he's very touchdown dependent, and I really don't think this was a fluke. He was number 4 in red zone targets, so it really does make sense that he scored so many touchdowns, and he is a great red zone receiver. He's a guy who can go up and high point the ball very effectively, and Brady obviously trusts him down there. This isn't a situation where he blew, his career high touchdowns out of the water. In 2 other seasons, Mike Evans has caught 12 touchdowns, so I don't really think this is a huge outlier like everyone seems to be portraying it as. Moving on to Chris Godwin. In 2020, he also dealt with a bunch of injuries. He missed games with a hamstring strain and a broken finger. He was also playing in a bunch of games, basically wearing a cast on one of his hands, so that was obviously very difficult for him as a wide receiver. In 12 games, he was targeted 84 times for 65 receptions, 840 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns. This is a very respectable stat line for the amount of games he played in, but it definitely did feel like he was a little bit of a fantasy disappointment, especially because he was drafted, as a wide receiver 1. He finished as a wide receiver 2 in points per game, and then was also just not on the field for the full season. Now let's move on to what I'm expecting from both of these players in 2021. I think Mike Evans almost seems like a lock for 1,000 receiving yards. He's reached that number in all 7 of his seasons, and if he can stay pretty healthy, I think he'll go for that again. If he plays a full 16 games, he should also be able to reach double-digit touchdowns, or at least come close. Basically anywhere from that 8 to 14 range, I think is pretty likely. For Chris Godwin, I think we could also see him go for 1,000 receiving yards with an injury-free season. I think he's likely going to see more volume than Mike Evans, but likely will have less touchdown upside. I think for this year, both of these players should be solid wide receiver 2s who have the potential to finish as wide receiver 1s. When I'm looking at this Buccaneers offense, there's a ton of weapons who are going to be involved. At wide receiver, you obviously have Evans, Godwin, you also have Antonio Brown, Scotty Miller, Tyler Johnson, and then you also have new rookie Jalen Darden. At tight end, you have Gronk, O.J. Howard, Cam Brate, 3 solid running backs with Fournette, Rojo, and Giovanni Bernard. I expect Evans, Godwin, and AB to be the most consistently targeted weapons. I feel like all of those guys are going to have a pretty solid role on a week-to-week basis, and then I think the other guys are kind of going to make their contributions at random times. For example, obviously guys like Gronk and Scotty Miller are going to have their big games, but I still think that Evans and Godwin are going to be on the field almost 100% of the passing downs and will still get a lot of work. But if I had to choose between these guys for fantasy, I'm going to lead towards Mike Evans. Normally, I don't like players who rely on touchdowns, but I really think Mike Evans can replicate this touchdown success. I feel less confident that Godwin will be able to receive enough volume to outperform Mike Evans, and then Evans' track record of production and reliability also helps give him that slight edge. All right, so that is going to wrap it up for this player versus player comparison. Let me know down below, are you guys going to be taking Mike Evans or Chris Godwin? And let me know your reasoning. I'll respond to everyone who comments down below. Also, make sure you guys like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the content. But that's all I have for today. Thank you guys for stopping by, watching, and listening, and I'll see you guys tomorrow where I put out another mock draft.